Now let's talk about the measures of disease frequency. The disease population we're focusing on is the type 2 diabetes in indigenous people in Canada. It is constructed by three dominant groups, which are the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Since the data of type 2 diabetes is usually combined with type 1 diabetes to construct the epidemiology of diabetes, and the type 2 diabetes usually plays 90 to 95% in the combined rates, we will be focusing on the details of general diabetes in the largest indigenous group of Canada, the First Nations. The first measure is prevalence. Prevalence is a proportion that reflects the number of existing cases of a disease in a population during a specific time period. There are two types of prevalence. Point prevalence is simply the prevalence at a point of time, whereas period prevalence is a prevalence in a given period. According to a diabetes research conducted in 2020, the prevalence rate of the general Ontario population rose constantly from 4 to 8% between 1995 and 2014. During the same period, the prevalence rate of the First Nations people increased steadily from 13 to 16.5%. The recent prevalence of the First Nations is unknown. However, if we assume that the rising speed of prevalence stays the same, the prevalence rate of First Nations is predicted to be above 23% based on the latest general prevalence of 15%. Besides prevalence, incidence estimates the occurrence of new disease. Cumulative incidence is the first type of incidence, which is simply the number of emergent cases of disease over the population that are initially at risk in a given time period. The more comprehensive type is the incidence rate or the true incidence. It is similar to cumulative incidence. However, while cumulative incidence requires all the members to be followed up for the entire experimental period, incidence rate is considering the unique follow-up time or the person time of every individual, which is more realistic. According to the same research in 2020, the blue line, which stands for the incidence rate of diabetes among the First Nations, was performing a pattern that initially fluctuated around 10 diabetes cases per 1,000 people and then dropped slightly to 8 cases per 1,000 people from 1995 to 2014. If we imagine that there is a pool of diabetes cases, incidence could be the inflow, prevalence is the storage, and the outflow are the cases who died or got cured.
Created using Powtoon.